Hello, everyone. You're listening to part one of our conversation with Samantha Beeler, President of the League of Credit Unions and Affiliates. We covered a lot of ground from leadership and innovation to regulation, advocacy, and taxation. We don't want you to miss a thing, so we're bringing it to you in two parts. Without further ado, let's jump in. Welcome to 22 Minutes in Lending. I'm your host, Vince Passione, and today I'm joined by Samantha Beeler, the President of the League of Credit Unions and Affiliates. Representing nearly 400 credit unions across Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and Virginia, the League's become a bold and unified voice for credit unions in the Southeast. Under Samantha's leadership, the League has launched major initiatives like its small credit union program, introduced a sweeping rebrand, and welcomed Virginia into its family, all while tackling unprecedented regulatory and economic headwinds. In this episode, we're going to unpack how Samantha sees the future of credit unions, where innovation fits in, and how recent upheavals in the regulatory landscape, including the shakeup at the NCUA, are likely to shape the road ahead. Samantha, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's awesome. Great to have you. So let's start off. The name, it's bold, it's a new name, it's the League. And in a recent CU broadcast that I watched prepping for this interview, you said we didn't want to go with something safe. So tell us about this decision and what was the vision behind the brand?
Well, I think I should start by saying I always wanted to be a superhero when I was a kid. So the logo was an easy choice. Now, I think like many people, we wanted to meet our members where they're at. And when we talk to our members about us, they call us the league, their league. And we didn't need to change that. There's trust in that reference, there's trust in that relationship. And then our job is to go out, and I do try to galvanize the team around this, is to go be bold and be their shield and go navigate this chaotic, crazy environment that we're always in on their behalf. And so we all ultimately, yes, it was a bold statement, and all it took was deleting one word.
Makes sense. So in the middle of all that, you integrated Virginia before the rebrand. So what prompted that merger and what does it unlock for your members?
So first, I'm going to go with what it unlocks. It is the opportunity for credit unions to continue to lean into our superpower, our strength, which is collaboration and cooperation. You know, it's one of the tenets of being a cooperative. The more we work together, the better off we always are. I've yet to find a time where credit unions have come together and not benefited from that shared vision and mission and work that we do that sets us apart from other industries. And so the things that we were able to do from a really operational sense is one, we were able to hire more people. We have a different structure than the Virginia League. So we have a robust for-profit and shared services, which allowed us to free up some resources for advocacy staff and consulting staff to represent Virginia and stay close to those credit unions. It helped us start the Office of Small Credit Unions, which you referenced very kindly in your introduction. And that took staffing. But then it also helped us add a COO, which would have taken us a few years and budgets to do, and a general counsel, both of whom are fantastic additions to our team and have helped in our other three states. Because you know this, these have to be mergers that benefit everybody, not just the state that's joining. And once our board saw that, they were pretty clear. And of course, that conversation came about because there was a transition, like so many moments in the business world, when there's a pivot point of change, that board assessed, are we going to hire again or are we going to partner with someone? And after many, many conversations and months of searching, they decided to partner with us, and we couldn't be more appreciative.
So you get really great economies of scale, you get specialization, but now you have to blend these four states, very different histories, very different dynamics. How's that going, and what are some of the challenges and opportunities you face?
Yeah, so you know what's funny about that is I only know the multi-state world, right? I grew up in the Go West League, so I only ever knew the excitement and fun it is to get to hop over to Idaho and get to know that state, to get to experience Washington and the beauty there, and Oregon, and really actually leverage those states against each other. So you mentioned how different they are. The thing that is overlooked so often because of how large our country is, how similar we all are. How similar the ag environment is, or the political environment, or the metropolitan environment, or the military bases that make up these states on the East Coast. We have a lot in our economies that were very similar. And here's my little cheat that I always did as a lobbyist. So if you go get the fifth grade history book for whatever state you're entering, you're going to find out their origin story as a state, the crops that help build that state, the industries that help form the metropolitan areas. And so that has been my way of getting to know each state I get the privilege of representing. And I can tell you there's a lot more that they have in common. Georgia and Virginia are cut from very similar cloth. And we're going to leverage those advocacy relationships to influence one another, as those two states like to color themselves purple. That is helpful in when we lobby those governors or those chambers.
So, Samantha, you now have about 10% of the credit union system in the league. So that gives you a pretty good purview and probably a pretty good estimation of some of the challenges that you probably see at a national level. So, what are some of the trends that you think we're underestimating right now in the credit union system?
Ooh. I can say trends. I hope that there are bright minds not underestimating them. I'm happy to see that there is work being done on many of these things. The first one that I would call out, and it's not going to be popular, so don't make a clip of this if you will, but it's our board strength, it's our board health. I meet so many phenomenal directors who have given their time, their talent, their resources to build this industry. And when we're candid, when it's just us at dinner, when we're not in the boardroom anymore, they'll admit to me just how overwhelmed they are with cybersecurity, AI, technology.
Right.
That there's just so many moving parts and pieces. And not that we have outgrown that part of our formation, but how do we get them to a place in the boardroom where they are well taken care of from a information and training and resource standpoint, but they also feel empowered to help us into the next 100 years. I I worry about that. I think about that. There are some great credit unions out there who are doing best practices when it comes to board health. But the other thing, obviously, technology. I once said, and it was also not that welcome, that we are cooperatives doing finance using technology when we should be cooperatives who are technology companies that provide finance. Uh, I hope we get closer to that. I haven't met a credit union yet who leads with technology and not finance, but if they're out there, I'd love to get to know them and study their model and share what they've done with the rest of the industry.
Well, there's a lot to unpack. You went there, so I'm going to go back. So, best practices on board governance. I had a chance to sit through the leverage event with you. Lots of commentary, right? Best practices like should we go and pay our board members? Should we shift the model from volunteers to paid independent board members? Um, some of the best practices that you see and the results of those best practices from a board governance perspective?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, I'll highlight, I believe it's more than a dozen. It might be even crawling close to 2 dozen states do allow for board compensation. And you can
Hmm.
be a well-compensated volunteer. Georgia in our footprint is an example of that. Not every credit union utilizes that resource. And that said, I don't know if it's compensation that's the best practice. When I'm talking to board members, when I'm talking to CEOs, I hear things like tenure, fresh ideas, just good governance of term limits, as well as different thinking. Where 20 years ago, it might have been great to have an accountant on the board. It still might be great. Now you might need a lawyer. But fast forward a few more years, and you might have to have someone with an IT background. Otherwise, you're behind the curveball. So I just think that the skill set will always evolve. And if we don't have a director base that allows for that, then we will be slightly handicapped. And it's not to say you can't pull from the SEG. In fact, I know of a credit union who is closed SEG still, very, very much so. In fact, they're in the headquarters of this global corporation, but because of that, because they're close, they have an IT expert who's an IT expert for a global corporation. They have someone from HR and accounting and frontline staff. And so it's something all credit unions could do. It's just going to take a lot of intentionality.
So let's shift right over the NCUA upheaval. So breaking story, right? Just days ago, President Trump removed both Todd Harper, Tanya Otsuka from the NCUA board, right? Chairman Carl Hauptman is still the acting board member. And I was reading as I was prepping for this podcast, Dennis Dollar basically said this effectively freezes the agency's ability to act at a time when credit unions need clarity, not confusion. So, how's the league advising its member credit unions to navigate the leadership vacuum at the NCUA?
Vince, I know we're good friends, so I'm going to push back on one of those things. I think Dennis later came out and said, that he feels like they can act. And I do think one of the things that credit unions, I was just saying they need to evolve and change. And one of the things they can do is project a lot of confidence into the market at this time and be the consistent voice that they've been. The other piece of that is obviously that, I was on two concurrent industry leadership calls today. I thought Jim Nussel did a great job just giving facts and saying this is where the industry's at. This is what this is what the statute says and what it doesn't say. And I think what's important right now is not guessing what the administration is trying to telegraph. When we met with the White House in March, they were very clear about their support of the industry. And they were very clear that they felt like they, as an administration in their past, right, their first term in office, have been very supportive and want to continue in that vein and see us as consumers, cooperatives being different than for-profit banking. And the other piece of that is when we, ping them midweek last week to say, hey, what's the behind the scenes here? They have names. They are looking to fill those positions. And I don't think this will be the end of the agency. I've said to credit unions to not just rest on that, to not think that maybe one day we could be a consolidated regulator, because in more than 40 states, there are consolidated regulators between credit unions and banks. And so to not think that the future state will always be thus, but as their advocate, it's mine to defend ours, not mine, but ours to defend our share insurance fund and our independent regulator that we worked hard for. I mean, we started out under, an ag regulator and had to fight for 30 years to get our own regulator, actually a little longer than that. And so I understand the fear that comes thinking that's being questioned. I don't think we're in the space, though, that is doing away with the industry at all. And I think that the next iteration of our regulator will be very business friendly.
So let's talk a little bit about sort of having a single regulator. When I was at Citigroup, I think the number was there are a dozen different regulatory agencies that come in to supervise Citigroup, and they're very uncoordinated. And there was a filing paper that went out, I think it was sometime around 2017, that talked about like 33% of the countries already have one regulator, the UK and South Korea being the two examples that they cite. So, is there a case, and what's your position on it, that it makes sense to potentially simplify the regulatory framework and maybe even get to one regulator that sits over all these financial institutions?
Yeah, I hope Mark is a sponsor. Filene's done some great work to research these topics as they emerge into the industry, right? And once we ask ourselves these questions, now, of course, it's for the industry to decide. That's what makes our advocacy so special, is it is done by committee of credit union. We just simply lay out the facts in the environment. I think that, so if I can, then let me take my advocate for credit union hat over here and just put on my kind of beltway, this is their thinking hat. If I were sitting in the administration, I would be looking at all the duplicative regulations. You mentioned the more than a dozen entities coming into Citigroup. I think credit unions, especially large credit unions, feel that. Dual chartered credit unions feel that. If you're a state charter but federally insured, and they don't seem to always coordinate. Worst case, they don't seem to agree, and then kind of who wins. And credit unions are forced to arbitrate that between their provincial regulators. That feels inappropriate. And so the day and age, though, where we would just have one regulator, I do think is not one as far as financial institutions, one as far as credit unions is gone. Because here's what would happen in that consolidated environment. Yes, you'd have a division of credit unions under some hypothetical umbrella, but then you would probably have an office of cybersecurity. They'd come in and do their own audit. Then you'd have an office of consumer. They'd come in and do, because what you'd want to do, true efficiency is about having those experts and housing them across multiple industries. And so I do think you'd then still be looking at multiple exam-like interactions, even with one regulator, because that regulator is so much bigger. So it's bureaucracy in a different form. It's taking the bureaucracy we have layered across agencies, putting it all under one umbrella, and making it different offices. I think best case scenario, though, is that we differentiate ourselves on structure, but not regulation. I don't think credit unions should react negatively to the idea that we could gain things from having a sophisticated regulator who works across different financial institutions. There is so much we do have in common with the banks when you think of cybersecurity threats.
That's right.
Perfect example of something we would want a consolidated response on that. So let's craft it, though. Let's not get it because someone else forced it on us and said, this is what's good for you. Let's get it because as an industry, we've done our research or we've decided that it's something that we need and thus go advocate for it. And that's the thing that gets me. If we could just advocate proactively and be ahead of the eight ball on these things, we wouldn't be so scared of the change that we're facing in the advocacy arena.
So let's step back and talk about precedent, right? Because you've had a chance, obviously, and I'm sure to leverage your network and in doing research. You see this precedent, the Humphreys Executor, right, versus the United States, which is back
Yeah.
in 1935. It said members of independent regulatory agencies like the FTC and by extension the NCUA couldn't be removed without cause. And that sort of shaped this sort of administrative state that we live in now
Yeah.
and agency independence. Do you think that that precedent can be utilized and to fight back on this, or do you think this is turned and it's not turning back?
Vince with the hard-hitting questions. You're a good researcher too. You got a good team because I think that you and a bunch of other regulatory lawyers were Googling this weekend and then reading and making yourselves smarter. And I'll say this, I'm not a lawyer and I don't pretend to be one. And when I do, my general counsel reminds me that I'm not for good reason. So I think the best answer I have is that there is absolute gray area in the law right now, because if you look at the credit union statute, for example, it's a silent statute for all intents and purposes. Whereas you have other, like the CFPB or other, the FBI or FDIC, how they're seated is different, but ultimately the same. Ultimately, the power lies with the executive, the Senate confirms them, and then there is this sentiment to serve at the will. Now, for cause looks different in every credit union, right? What you would separate an employee for maybe in your company is different from the credit union next door. So that's how I've been likening it to our industry is, we are applying what would have been generally accepted reasons for termination under maybe other regimes to this one. And I think that that's just, we knew that wasn't going to be the case, that this administration was going to be the reformation on the agency state, the bureaucrats, the alphabet soup that makes up DC. Now, are some of those soups really important and healthy and great for us? Absolutely. Are other ones industry, are they regulators our industry has been complaining about for quite some time? Yes. And so I don't like when we get as an industry caught up in reacting to a partisan action, thinking that that's a policy reformation. The CFPB is something that credit unions have been talking to me about since the inception. I started right after Dodd-Frank in our industry. And so to wake up one day and hear credit unions saying, well, we need to defend the CFPB, I was shocked. I didn't know what
Exactly.
parallel universe I was in. And I knew it was being, it was a partisan statement. What I think they were trying to say, which I love about credit unions, is we need to protect consumers. And there are too many bad actors still out there hurting consumers, and that we can always get behind. And there is a space for that, protecting consumers. And there is supposed to be a bureau for that, but they came after us and said, in fact, I think 94%, right, of their actions were on regulated depository institutions. That's not the bad actors.
Got it. So I was listening to your broadcast interview at the GAC, and you had this quote. You said the need for stability and predictability from our regulators. And there's that need. How do you advise your members today, given all look, it's everywhere, right? We're seeing it everywhere. Lots of, change, rapid change, things going back to the way they were and then flipping again. What's your advice to our listeners and to your members these days?
I'll give you risky advice because it's late in the day after a very long weekend of reading the regulatory tea leaves. And my first advice is remind yourselves who the president is. because he is the president right now, he's the leader of the free world. So, do the research. I have recently watched some really good documentaries that remind me that he is ultimately a businessman and a negotiator. And that's not to justify I'm just saying that as I do any research to find out who people are. And he's always negotiated that way. Like even when he did the whole save the ice skating rink in Central Park, right? He says big things, he goes all in, and then he lets everyone react, and then he gets to this middle ground. And that's the state of play. And we have to recognize that. And once you recognize that as the state of play, it actually does become kind of consistent. It actually does become less shocking, less jarring. And so know the environment we're in. And then the second piece of that is the easiest conversations I've had over the last few days are, did you open the branch? Did anything change about the insured nature of your deposits? Do you know any regulatory changes that are happening, impacting your operating environment? Okay. No to all of those, hopefully and likely. And then in that case, continue on, keep moving forward on these cool things you're doing, serving the community. Don't stop being credit unions, because that's our secret sauce. So don't jeopardize any of that by pulling any of that back. Be you, be unapologetic about it. And that will be the best advocacy we have against taxation, against any kind of regulatory environment changes we don't like. If we're unapologetically us and doing business as usual and carrying on in times of crisis, that will set us apart.
That's it for part one of our conversation with Samantha Beeler, but there's still more to come. In part two, we'll dive deeper into the topic of taxation. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it, and we'll see you next time for another 22 Minutes in Lending.
Thank you for listening to the 22 Minutes in Lending podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You'll find links to any resources mentioned in the show notes. If you're enjoying our show, be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star review.